Welcome back to another episode of the Pax What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perry Goldstein. And Perry, there's actual Packers football on. This Saturday, the Packers play the Browns in their very first preseason game of the season. And yes, it's only the preseason, but the Packers are going to be on our TV, and that's pretty exciting. I can't believe that it is finally here. All of the training camp, all of the off season. We made it through free agency and the draft, and now we're going to watch the Packers play football.
Every year after the Super Bowl, the off season just feels so long. It feels like it just drags, and you think, oh, and then come August, you're like, wow, that was so fast. I do really feel like the football off season is filled and peppered with so many fun events that it does break it up quite nicely. You know, you have a quick period, and then you get the draft. Free agency is obviously fun, but the draft is obviously the main event. And then you gotta, some time off, and then everyone reports to camp, and you have training camp, and then all of a sudden you're back, like you said, with preseason games. So the season's right around the corner, but we are going to get a look at the Packers starters this Saturday. We did learn that today, which is very exciting. How are you feeling? Are you surprised? Not surprised? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was definitely a little bit surprising because I, of course, am writing the pregame six packs for Cheesehead TV again this year. And one of the first things I started writing was that we're probably going to see a ton of Michael Pratt and Sean Clifford because they released Jacob Eason early this week. So I was like, okay, two quarterbacks. They'll probably each get a half. That's typically what the Packers do. And sure enough, then Matt LaFleur announces that Jordan Love is going to see some snaps on Saturday. So yeah, I think that it makes sense for them. You had mentioned it before we started recording that he missed a little bit of training camp while that contract was being worked out. And we've seen what happens to former Packers teams when none of the starters play for all three preseason games. It's kind of, a long time to be without football.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a series, I don't think he's going to come out there for a quarter even. I think he'll probably get one or two drives and then they'll call it. But yeah, and it's not just Love, it's all of the starters, it sounds like, will be out there. So a shift for Matt LaFleur and his coaching staff.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it'll probably be a series or two. I don't think it's going to be too much. I do think it's probably partly due to they still need time together, need snaps. Maybe it's because he missed some time. Maybe it's just that they're still young and they're young offense, and they still have so many young new pieces being added. The defense side of the ball, I think, is fairly obvious, right? They need as many snaps as humanly possible together, especially in like a live game setting before the season starts with the new Jeff Hafley scheme. Not that I think we're going to see anything too wild and crazy, because you never do from defenses in preseason. But as much time together on the field, playing real snaps with pads on against an opponent for the defense is going to be crucial before week one. It is new for Matt LaFleur. He's probably learning as he goes and taking lessons from past seasons and trying to tweak his game plans for going into the season. We'll see how it goes. It's always a balance with the preseason, right? You want to make sure guys are ready. You want to protect their bodies. How much, how little do you balance it out is always the question, and everybody kind of tries it out differently.
Yeah, and I mean, even, I think that it's just par for the course with Packers fans and what we've seen, but even family night, like they were doing 11 on 11s and there wasn't like live tackling. It was more two-hand touch at that point. But there was one point where Christian Watson came up and he looked like he was limping for a second. Like he kind of reached down and you could just tell that the air in the stadium was like sucked out, because that's just the expectation is you never know if it's going to happen. It could happen in practice. We just saw Zadarius Smith from the Browns had like a knee contusion from running into someone, and that's one of the more minor injuries that can happen in camp. We've seen guys tear their ACLs, and Jordy Nelson tore his ACL in the preseason. So yes, I realize not to jinx it, but I just mean in general, like it makes sense it's a very delicate balance to try and decide how many reps to give your starters before you pull the plug to make sure that they can go fully in the regular season. So Before we talk about maybe like our players to watch for the first preseason game, I know you said you didn't get to watch Family Night Live, but the clips you saw, the sights and sounds, was there anything that really stood out to you from kind of that first real broadcasted practice?
Um, Family night every year just holistically really blows me away. It's just so special. And I know you were up in Green Bay this weekend, so I want to give you, some time to talk about what it was like to be there. But it's just such a special thing. Like every time I explain family, because I was explaining to family what family night is to someone this weekend, and they were like, "So the fans just go in the stands and watch a practice?" And I was like, yeah, basically, but like they fill Lambeau Field to watch a live practice on a Saturday night. And everyone brings their kids, and the players bring their kids, and the coaches bring their families, and they watch fireworks. Yeah, it's so special. And I think it's such a beautiful way to kick off the season. We're talking about at the top of the show the long wait in between, the Super Bowl and all the off season. Now football is back, and I love the way the Packers start off the season this way. And it really is just a practice. It's maybe a little heightened, it's that extra oomph, if you will. But I just think it's just so Packers and wholesome and special. That being said, I do think that like I said, the oomph was there. It seemed like there was a little bit of jarring. There seems to be a lot of smack talk going on between the defense and the offense, which you love to see. I think the wide receivers are starting to really like show off. A lot of what I was seeing, at least on the from the media who was there and were posting about it, was the wide receivers were really getting some really nice reps up against the starting cornerbacks. At least in one-on-ones. Obviously, it looks very different when it's like scrimmage time, but Christian Watson got his against Jair. Romeo Dobbs got his against Jair. Jaden Reed as well. So as much as it looked like the offense was struggling maybe at the start of camp, it seems like they're starting to catch up. So you like to hear that as they're starting to get into the time where they're going to need to be putting it all together.
Yeah, I think, probably what stood out the most to me, and again, it's practice. It take all of it with a grain of salt, but was the accuracy from Jordan Love. Like you can tell that there is a comfort with all of these players that we saw missing for the first like 8 or 9 weeks of last season. And we kept talking about it on this show, right? We'd every week we'd be like, "Hey, yeah, the offense put up say 20 points, but they left at least a touchdown, probably a field goal out there." Drive stalled out when guys were just like a smidge not on the same page. And even in something like family night, like Jair had really, really good coverage on
Yeah.
Christian Watson, the player talking about, and the ball was just exactly where it needed to be. It was where only Watson could get it. And when you have a receiver with Watson's body size and speed, like that's what you want from your quarterback. So those I think were the things that were really impressive because we didn't get to see a ton of him in the preseason the last couple of years, especially because he came in during the COVID year where he didn't get those opportunities, those live reps. But yeah, it was everything that you would expect from somebody you just paid the contract that you just paid him. So that I think was really exciting. And it was a lot of fun to see the young guys in the inside linebacking core and the secondary. We talk about who's going to be corner 2 opposite Jair, and right now it looks like it's Stokes probably, and that's probably a good segue into the preseason and who we're watching. But all the safeties got their turn on family night, which was really cool. Hopper, I thought, had a really nice night. So the inside linebackers, the rotation that they're having there, and not even just the rookies, but like Eric Wilson has been getting shouted out in pressers, and Isaiah McDuffie has flashed quite a bit. So just a lot of intrigue going into this first preseason game. So let's shift then, Perry. Who we'll talk about all of it, but who
Yeah.
maybe are you most excited to see going into week 1, knowing that the starters will be on the field?
Well, there's who I'm most excited to see, and then there's who I think is most important to watch, which are two very
Okay.
different things. So I'm most excited to see the defense finally. Namely, you mentioned already the safeties. I'm imagining that Jeff Hafley is going to rotate the safeties This will be our first look at Xavier McKinney as a Packer back there, like full force, which has to get everyone excited. But who his partner is going to be on the back end, my expectation is it's going to start with Javon Bullard, but Evan Williams will get his snaps. Anthony Johnson Jr. will get his snaps. He's been having, I think, a phenomenal camp by all accounts. And I don't know how they're going to split it up, but we will see all three of them back there with Xavier McKinney. Maybe even they'll pull the starters, including McKinney, and we'll get to see even more of the three of them on the field as the game goes on. For me, what I think is most important to watch in this game is the offensive line rotation. This is the biggest question mark. So, period, for the offense. Who's going to be where? We've been seeing a lot of Jordan Morgan at right guard. He's likely going to start there in the preseason. I imagine this will be his first like live game snaps in the NFL. See how he holds up. I think that's going to be my one to watch. Like if the safeties are 1A, Jordan Morgan's 1B, and who else they rotate around with the starters in there. I don't think Zach Tom is going to play. It doesn't seem like he's at that stage in his recovery. At least I would be surprised. So who they slot in for him at right tackle? Do they move Elton around? Do they put somebody else at center instead of Josh Myers? How does Rasheed Walker play? Do they rotate anyone else at left tackle? Lots and lots and lots of questions. I'm sure they will do all the above as the game goes on because it's preseason. And I'm sure we will leave this game with 0 questions answered, probably more questions given what they end up doing, but just a lot of eyes on who they play where, who they start where, and how those players perform.
Yeah, and I think the maybe tricky part in some of this assessment is that we don't know at this point if the Browns are playing their starters. The only one that we saw formally announced was that Jameis Winston is going to be starting at quarterback, Deshaun Watson's out. But when we're talking about evaluating like a Jordan Morgan at right guard, the Browns have a very formidable front, and I don't think any of that starting four is going to be playing. It's Myles Garrett, Dalvin Tomlinson, Shelby Harris, and Zadarius Smith. Don't think any of them are going to be out there, which is unfortunate, because you want to see your guys against the cream of the crop. But yeah, so, there is that caveat here as well, where everything we see in the preseason is not necessarily one, it's vanilla, and two, we just don't know the caliber of the starters that are going to be out there for their opponents. But I agree with you. I think that how the secondary is utilized is going to be really interesting. I'm excited to see, again, the inside linebackers and their rotation and just in general, kind of what they look like. Because, again, we don't know which of the Browns receivers are going to be playing, but they have some fun names. Cedric Tillman, we really liked coming out of the draft last season. He's there. They acquired Jerry Jeudy. I'd imagine that, he'll probably get some looks in the Kevin Stefanski offense, even though he doesn't necessarily need like practice reps. Elijah Moore, like there's some fun pieces. So we'll see whether it's Eric Stokes or Valentine out there, what that looks like. Any particular players on offense that you're really excited about? We kind of touched on the defense, and I know we said offensive line, but do you think Tucker Kraft plays? He came back to practice, or do you think it's a little too early for him?
I'd be surprised, given he just got back to practice. Also, yes, Tucker Kraft came back to practice this week. Offensively, I mean, always excited to see Josh Jacobs in this new offense. Definitely looking forward to seeing what Marshawn Lloyd can do. I mean, you said it, right? It's the caveat is always you might not be going against starters. Surprisingly, it's not actually the offense that I'm next most excited to see, but special teams.
I'm glad you mentioned it. I was going to bring it up.
We have the new kickoff rules, and I'm really excited. I don't know if they're going to have Keyshawn Nixon participate in them. If they're playing the starters, I imagine they're doing it at all 3 phases, which means they will have him return kicks. I'm really excited to see what he looks like in the new kickoff rules. I'm looking forward to see who else they rotate in there if they do, just given that new rules kind of cater themselves to different player types.
Mhm.
We've seen other teams mention they're going to have a safety back there. I mean, just it's going to be very unique across the board, I think, to watch what teams do with who they have returning kicks and punts, and the kicker competition. We still have a kicker competition going on full force. So I imagine they're also going to be rotating the kickers if and when it gets to that point. So who's going to be able to kick in Lambeau Field and successfully, because we don't know still who's going to be the starting kicker for the Packers week 1. And live games, I mean, practice is practice, but this is, I think, where they really are going to have to shine.
Well, and Cleveland is a terribly tough place to kick because their stadium is literally on the lake. So it is just a wind tunnel. It is awful. As somebody who's had to sit through games in Cleveland, it is
Oh, I
miserably
forgot
cold
they're
and
away. You're
windy.
correct.
It's gonna be gross. But yeah, and I mean, I think I'm glad you brought up the kick return because I think it was Peter Bukowski called it, it's kind of like Red Rover. Like there's a line, and if Keyshawn Nixon or whoever's returning kicks can get past that line of defense, it's game over. So, and I mean, I don't know how many people tuned in to watch the Texans and the Bears at the Hall of Fame game. I know that was like the running joke of Twitter, was who's actually hates themselves enough to sit here and watch this on a Thursday night, but that's why I tuned in, because I wanted to see live reps of the kickoff. And it's different. It's weird. And I think it's going to do a lot for player safety, which is the goal, as all of us who love this sport want it to be around and be the sport that we know and love. But yeah, it's different, and I think we're gonna see a ton more returns this year. I know it's designed to kind of keep everything condensed, but the speed at which these players play the game now, I think that there's gonna be a lot of broken kicks, and I think Keyshawn Nixon is probably just, like, chomping at the bit to get those opportunities, which is fun.
Yeah. Okay, so who are you looking at offense then?
To me, it's like the very cliche players that we would expect to watch during the preseason, but I want, like, who is it? Is it Malik Heath? Is it Grant DeBose? Like, Bo Melton? Who's gonna round out? Because this entire offseason, we said that there felt like a starting 4 wide receiving core. And even going into the draft, we were like, maybe if the Packers really like someone in the 2nd or 3rd round, they would take an early pick and invest it in a wide receiver, even if we don't think they need to. And they didn't, because that told us how they felt about the players that they have in the room. Samori Toure is still there. Obviously, he's stuck around enough. The Packers like what they have in him. So to me, it's like the bottom of the depth chart wide receivers and who's going to kind of distinguish themselves, because I saw Jordan Love sat down with Kay Adams today at training camp, and she kind of asked, like, who's going to be wide
Yeah.
receiver 1? Who do you think is wide receiver 1? And he was like, well, I think all of these guys think that they are wide receiver 1, and I want to keep it that way, which is such a good answer and a testament to the guys in the room and all of their capabilities. And you and I have said on the show who we think wide receiver 1 will be, but they all bring such a unique skill set to the offense. And I think Jordan has such a comfort with all 3 of those starters. And even Wicks, you could argue is the 4th, that having extra bodies that, like to scrap are only going to complement what's already in the room.
Yeah. Can't forget about Wicks. Separation king. But I agree with you. I thought that comment was very smart. He's already very good at the media.
Mm-hmm.
But it also lends itself quite nicely to the way that this offense operates, which is that and we've been talking about this ad nauseum, which is they don't really have a 1. They haven't needed a 1. No one's separated themselves yet as a 1. We will see, of course, if the season changes things at all, but I doubt it. They have 4 1s right now, and that's fine. And a kick-ass run game, hopefully.
Yeah, one other thing that I'm curious your thoughts on. Well, there's multiple things, of course, always, but we talked about the offensive line a little bit and who we kind of think at this point the starters shake out as. And right now, it seems like if we were going off of just training camp, you'd have Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Jordan Morgan, and Zach Tom as your starting 5. When Matt LaFleur was asked about like the swing tackle competition for who's going to be that third kind of backup spot. He said it was a wide open competition, and I think that that's true. There's Kadeem Telfort, there's Andre Dillard, and then there's Caleb Jones as the big three. Where do you see the offensive line? Do you think that they've kind of narrowed down their starters? Do you think there's opening roster spots still up for grabs? Do you think that like Sean Ryan can wiggle his way in there? Or do you think, is there a world where Jordan Morgan kicks out? Is Jordan Morgan their surprise swing tackle and we don't know that yet? Like, what are your thoughts about the offensive line?
This is a great question. I still think that there's a lot of moving pieces happening right now. And I think that the preseason is going to settle it out. The Packers have a good problem in that they have a few solid starters who can play at a high level at multiple positions. And I think it makes it actually more difficult for them to place their not solid starters in their rightful positions when you know that Elton or Zach Tom, yeah, they are elite at their left guard and right tackle spot, respectively, but they can also be elite at center or they can be elite at both guard positions. Where does that leave the rest of the players? Where do you develop the rest of the players? I actually wonder if it makes it more difficult. That's what I've been wondering, at least this off season. It does feel like Rasheed Walker has locked up left tackle. But I also think the answer, to totally contradict what I just said, I also think the answer could be the simple answer, which is the Packers go into the season with Rasheed, Elton, Josh, and Zach Tom, and right guard is a battle this preseason with Jordan Morgan and Sean Ryan. And Jordan Morgan as the potentially just like more elite prospect, traits wise, ends up winning it out. They have great backups then, and one of the swing tackle is one of the guys you just mentioned. I think the latter is probably the more likely scenario than all of the movement for consistency purposes, because at the end of the day, what matters most is protecting Jordan Love and making sure he knows who's in front of him and he can check the protections properly. And that's where I think they'll probably go, unless somebody comes out in one of these preseason games and just happens to have like a really phenomenal game.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good answer. And I think that the Packers are fortunate to have a guy like Adam Stenavich as the OC because his bread and butter is the offensive line. And they always, the party line has always been best five. And this is a really good opportunity for them to go out there and really determine who the best five are. And we saw, right? Josh Myers was out due to personal reasons for a couple of practices, and they had Alton Jenkins in there, and they had guys that, historically didn't have center experience playing center because they wanted to give these guys looks. So they drafted Jacob Monk, and no, I don't think he's all of a sudden going to be a starter, but it's pretty rare for your entire offensive line to play a cohesive 17 games together, barring injuries, a shoe coming off even for a couple plays. Like, strange things happen, and them all having experience, I think, is really important. Any other spot that you think is like a really intense battle that you'll be watching as far as the depth chart, or just guys you're really excited to see get out there for either their second season, their rookie season?
I mean, I'm definitely very excited to see Edge Cooper and Quay together finally.
Yeah.
It's a duo that has been very hyped up this offseason. They seem to really enjoy playing together. Edge Cooper has been talked about a ton by the beat as a guy who's come in with a lot of energy, a lot of athleticism. It's going to bring a lot of juice to the middle of this defense, just like kind of elevate it in a way that they haven't had in a while, finally having a more elite playmaker there with Quay. So I really can't wait for that. I know it's preseason and they're not going to give us some, fun looks. I know Jeff's not going to give us some fun looks, but I think just seeing them together for the first time I'm definitely looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to seeing who's wearing the green dot. I know it's gonna. My bet is still Quay, Andy Herman.
If you're listening,
this is our debate all off season. But again, who's communicating? All jokes aside, like who is the one who is owning the communication? Since that was something that they struggled with last season.
yeah, I think that's a really good one. I'm excited to see Hopper as well. It sounds like he is always in the backfield, stuffing the run or getting after the quarterback, which is a lot of fun for your inside linebackers to do. And I do think it's really interesting, not that this matters at all, but on the Packers roster page of their website, they have finally stopped listing all of their edge rushers as linebackers, and now they're all listed as defensive linemen. So you can tell that the shift to 4-3 has officially happened because now you have guys like Preston Smith listed as D line and not linebackers, which is always my pet peeve going on their roster website. But joking aside, we don't know what JJ Enagbari's going to look like to start the season, if he's going to be able to go out there week one. And because of that, the Packers have 3 edge rushers and the rest is kind of wide open. So
Yeah.
that's, I think that there's always like a darling on that defensive front. A couple years ago, it was trash can full of dirt, Jack Heflin. So, I mean, I think there's going to be somebody who like really endears themselves to fans and comes out for that kind of 4th or 5th edge rushing spot. Early favorites would probably be like Brenton Cox Jr. I know that he's been around for a while when it comes to the Packers. Kenneth Odemegwu is their international player who's in, and he's been a lot of fun. Wes just wrote a really good story about him. So, all players, to watch, and that's where I always like to focus some of my energy is on that last edge rushing spot, because I think that's going to be telling who's able to go this year. So, any final thoughts about the preseason before we shift to potentially our last topic, unless news has broken in the last half hour that we were recording this?
It has not, but that is my final thought is that, who knows, by the time the Packers get to Cleveland, they may or may not have a new wide receiver. So, I don't know. They're in the hunt.
That was a good segue. We obviously wanted to talk about Brandon Aiyuk because I'm curious, not only what team you think. It sounds like it's the Patriots, the Browns, and the Steelers at this point that he's got to choose between, unless there's like a dark horse that emerges. But do you think that changes anything for the 49ers? Do you think that they're still front runners in the NFC West? Does Ricky Pearsall move the needle for you as a first round wide receiver? How damaging is it for the 49ers if Aiyuk is not on that offense?
I mean, look, anytime you lose a wide receiver of his caliber, it's not great. I would not go out there and say, oh, yeah, it means nothing. But they have their big 3, right? They have their running back 1 in Christian McCaffrey. They have their wide receiver 1 in Deebo Samuel, and they have their tight end 1 in George Kittle. And those 3 guys eat up the majority of the touches and the snaps in this offense. And I imagine that's, besides the contract and the money, also a piece of why Aiyuk probably wants out. I can imagine he's sitting there thinking, I know I can be a 1 somewhere else. I know that another team would not only pay me, but I would be the star on their team. And you listed, the 3 teams, and yes, he would be competing for snaps potentially with George Pickens, but he would still be the unequivocal star for the Steelers if he was on that team, and he would absolutely be the only one on the Pats. And depending on what that trade looked like, as we were talking about before the show started, he might, be the 2 with Amari Cooper if he went to the Browns, if they were somehow able to keep Amari Cooper in this type of trade. But he still would be getting more attention anywhere he went. So in my mind, the 49ers are going to be the 49ers, whether they have Brandon Aiyuk or not. They're still the front runner with or without him, which again is probably why they're not out here paying him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if Ricky Pearsall as a first round wide receiver moves the needle enough, that's all they need. Like you said it, they've got a big three already. They've got Debo, they've got George Kittle, they've got McCaffrey. Aiyuk was great. He's incredibly talented. Any team would want to have him on their roster.
Yeah.
But going into the season, Ricky Pearsall's what at worst wide receiver three for
3.
them, like depending on what that looks like. And they invested a first round pick in that. So I think the investment in a first round pick already kind of said that maybe the writing was on the wall because before the or before the draft, Debo was one of the potential trade candidates, right? Like I think they just kind of had to hedge their bets and say, hey, even if we don't have both of these guys, we're gonna have one, and then we need to draft somebody to be a complement. But I actually had the Rams winning the NFC West in a mock that we did on Pack-A-Day. So regardless of if Ayuk is there or not there, I think the 49ers are going to be incredibly talented, but I think that the NFC West is just really damn good. And I think the Rams are going to be just as good. And I think that, you know, it's possible that the representative from the NFC in the Super Bowl comes from the West. But you talked about it a little bit. If you had to pick your landing spot, you are Ayuk. Where are you going between the Patriots, the Browns, and the Steelers?
It's between the Browns and the Pats. And our discussion was, do you want to get paid or do you want to win now? And I think if you're choosing between those three, right, those are your only options because someone could come out that's not in those three. If you want to win games, the more likely option to win games now is the Browns, although their quarterback situation is questionable. If you want to gamble on future winning and likely get the most money at the moment, I'm going with the Pats.
Yeah,
Because
I mean,
the young QB is the question, right? Like Drake May is the question mark, and you're probably going with like some growing pains with him. But you, like I mentioned before, the unequivocal one there, he's going to feed you. He's going to have to feed you. You're probably going to be a security blanket. You're gambling on if he pans out, if Gerard Mayo pans out. You're probably going to have a subpar season this year. But if he does pan out, you're the one on a good team with a great young quarterback.
yeah, I do think it's interesting that these are, the final teams. And like we said, maybe somebody else emerges, but it felt like for a chunk of the offseason that it was inevitable that he was going to go to the Commanders because we saw him hanging out with Jaden Daniels. And that is such a young, fun roster in a very, contentious division, obviously, but he would play with Terry McLaurin and he would immediately, at worst, be wide receiver 2. Like Jahan Dotson is going to get bumped down the depth chart. Like the guys that they have are immediately bumped down. So I thought that would have been really fun if, the same kind of gamble you're taking with the Patriots.
Yeah.
The Commanders have such a good defense that if their young quarterback pans out, but yeah, if it's me, I think I would take Cleveland just because that division probably gives you the best opportunity. The Ravens got a lot younger. They're having to rely on a lot less experience now, and they still, of course, could win the division. They still have Lamar, but I think the Browns give you the best shot at like a real chance in the AFC. The Patriots, it's growing pains with the Dolphins and the Bills and even the Jets, honestly, as a playoff team. So we'll see. It's going to be really interesting, but I also think that it's telling that both of us said absolutely not. Don't go to the Steelers because you're either playing with
Yeah,
Russell Wilson or
it
Justin Fields, and
when the
I
most
just
attractive thing about your team is the head coach, probably not a good sign.
or an edge rusher that you're like, great. He has nothing to do with me. Been there,
Yeah.
done that in San
Like I'm like,
Fran,
I
but
mean, Mike Tomlin's great. That's it.
yeah, we'll see. It'll be a lot of fun. Maybe he will be in Cleveland by the time the Packers get there on Saturday, but who knows?
Who
Perry, any
knows?
final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
No, just excited to see some real football. We'll be back next week breaking down the preseason game and any news, if there is any news next week. But I'm excited about it. We're right there. We're right there.
Right there, Packers at Cleveland taking on the Browns on Saturday at 3:25 p.m. Central Time, 4:25 Eastern Time. Check it out. It's going to be a fun one. Obviously, starters will be playing, and we'll be here to talk about it after it happens. So thank you, as always, for listening to this show. You can find the podcast on Twitter at PWSS Podcast, Perry at Perry_Goldstein, me at Maggie J. Loney, everywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. Thank you so much for continuing to download the show and support us that way. If you're here on YouTube, thank you so much for liking and subscribing to the show. That helps us out a ton, and we can't wait to kick off the 2024 season with you all. It is coming up before you know it, so stick with us. It's going to be a great year. And as always, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.